This is Illuminate, the podcast about men with good hearts, open minds, and a desire to make the world better. Welcome to Illuminate. I'm your host, Chris Tidrick, and I'm here with Wayne Martin. Wayne is an adoptive father of two young adults, a gold and platinum award-winning music executive and entrepreneur, a podcast creator and host, and a mindset coach for creatives. Wayne regularly speaks on campuses such as New York University, Berklee College of Music, and Harvard Law School, and has been interviewed as a music industry authority in the pages of Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Billboard, and the Associated Press. Welcome to the show, Wayne.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so I like jumping right in with my podcast guests and ask kind of a big question, like, what's your why? Where do you find purpose and what drives you?
That is a big question. Service to others is the first thing that comes to mind, or empowering others, I think, has always been a calling for me. It started in my faith, being raised in the South in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, evangelical family. Lots of church activities and service to others being drilled into me. Yeah. And even though I'm separated from that dogma right now, later in life, it definitely is something that stuck because it brought tremendous value, I think. So yeah, service empowerment is maybe even a better word.
Yeah, excellent. So tell me a little bit about that journey. You said you kind of started in this evangelical background. So start wherever you'd like, but I'd love to hear, the high points of your journey, maybe some of those pivotal moments, some of those places where you kind of changed direction in your life.
Yeah, I grew up, as I said, very religious environment, Southern, conservative, and as I went through high school, we were very much insulated or siloed, is what we would say in business, right? So we were siloed. Yeah. We didn't see people that weren't like us, religions that weren't like us, and families that didn't look like ours. But I started getting involved in working with actors and set designers and creative people in one of the local children's theaters when I was in high school. And I started to meet people from other communities inside of Nashville. And it changed my perspective because I got to see people that were also my age, but were coming from very different places. And so my world kind of expanded, and it was unsettling at first. But then I started hanging around. I had a best friend whose father was a famous record producer. How could you not have a father who was a famous record producer in Nashville in the 1970s and 80s, right? And so I'd go to his house and there'd be someone on the grand piano in the living room and there'd be people hanging out in different places playing the drum kit in the garage. And I started to really understand so much about different lives that people led. And so that was probably the beginning of me wanting to explore things that weren't what I had been raised with, to be around people that were incredibly creative and talented and spontaneous, and did not have the kind of rigid spiritual structure that we had in my family. So that was huge. And then, of course, when I started college, I was still doing the thing. I had another best friend her father was, a famous record producer, because then again, whose was mine? Mine wasn't, but yeah. I got frisson the very first time. Do you know what frisson is? That is the physical reaction to music. It happens to about 50% of the population where we get goosebumps.
Oh, that's amazing. I had never heard that term before.
Yeah, so it's a scientific, biological phenomenon, and it only happens to about 50%. So if you say, some people are so into music and some people are like, yeah, I could take it or leave it. It usually has to do with whether or not they experience frisson. And I experienced that, and when I did, I was like, okay, wait a minute. Like, everything I know is out the window. Everything I've ever studied, people that I've been around my whole life, I have a whole new community here of people that I want to meet. And so through that, I did study other religions and things, but through that, I started to hang out with the long-haired, cigarette-smoking, shady characters that would be the foundation for my career. So what did you go into college thinking you were going to study? I went in knowing that I was going to study the music business, and I was in Nashville, Belmont University now, which is a top Yeah. Well, it was the top three then. It's just
Yeah,
that not a lot of people knew about it.
my son is actually a music major at the University of Illinois, and he looked at Belmont when we were first looking. So
Sweet.
yeah, so I'm
That's awesome.
familiar with it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So when I went to Belmont, I knew that that's what I wanted. I wanted to be around creative people, and I wanted to be around musicians specifically, people who wrote songs, people who expressed themselves vocally, people who could pick up an instrument. And I had taken piano. I didn't figure it out. Like it wasn't for me,
Yeah.
but I wanted to help them. Right. I wanted to be attached somehow. And I wasn't going to be like the sideman playing banjo or guitar. I wasn't going to be on stage with them. What was I going to do? So I went to Belmont with that in mind.
Okay, fantastic. So what happens next in the journey after college? Yeah.
Well, the really crazy thing that happened was, and this kind of goes back into my why, was that there were people that lifted me while they were climbing. There were people that saw promise in me, Chris, when I didn't necessarily know that I had promise in myself. And I was actually working for a major label before I graduated college.
Okay.
I received my first gold record award when I was 21 years old.
Wow.
I hadn't even graduated college.
So what is, describe to me, like, what does that do to your brain and maybe even your heart when like you have that level of success when you're 21? Like I know a lot of artists maybe that young when they achieve that, but probably not as many people on the business side. Like, what does that do to you?
Wow, it was a paradigm shift. It cemented everything that I had learned and that other people had seen in me, which was if I focused hard enough and worked hard enough, I could do what I wanted to do. And so those people that were mentors to me in business were actually saviors for me in a lot of ways. I didn't have the best self-esteem growing up. And so it knocked all of that on its ear. And I thought, okay, wait, what can't I do? So at 24, I got a 6 times platinum award, and that was my first platinum. So working for all of these record companies and these projects, I was in my zone. And it took me 7 years to finish college because I didn't want to finish it.
Well, it sounded like you were pretty busy actually working as well as going to school.
I already had the dream gig.
Yeah.
I'm so fortunate. And those people lifted me up. And I think I everything from the religious background and everything from what people did to put me in the spotlight. Mike Martinovich at Sony Music and Alan Brown and Fletcher Foster were all part of the media team there. And they introduced me to Dolly Parton. And we started doing publicity for Dolly. And I was 25. Right. And and it was just like they put me in that room.
Yeah.
And if they hadn't said, he can do this, let him handle it. Let's go to lunch. Wayne's got this. Yeah. Then I that there's nothing that will bolster your confidence more than letting someone else say, you've got it.
That's that's a lesson in leadership right there. I mean, delegating to people that, you have to take a chance on. It's a risk as a leader, but it's creating that opportunity for them to succeed. And that's such a great example of that.
Oh, and they were fantastic leaders. I learned from, and I talk about this a lot in my music business diatribes, but I talk a lot about how artist development and leadership has been lost in the music industry. And so I try very hard to keep it alive, both of those disciplines alive. And you're right, it is leadership, allowing someone else, empowering someone else to do the right thing instead of making sure the right thing gets done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And stepping away from it so they grow into themselves.
Yeah.
From that, by the time I was 28, I was the executive vice president for a global independent record company. So, and I was 28. Like I had just graduated college a year and a half before because it took me 7 years. I finished 3 years early on the decade plan, Chris. I didn't right. I didn't take 7 years. I finished 3 years early on the decade plan.
I like that. It's all about perspective, right?
It is perspective. Yeah. Perspective drives everything.
Yeah. So then where have you gone since? I mean, you've been in the industry for a long time, but like, tell me some more parts of your journey.
Sure. I was very fortunate to live the red carpet life for a very long time. And I don't say that flippantly or with ego. I was put in a position and they said, excel. And I did. And as a result, I was the guy that was 25 years old and had hair down to his elbows and was hanging out with Ozzy on the tour bus and flying to LA for dinner with an artist from Nashville. It was that whole scenario. And then I realized I always wanted to be a manager, but I didn't feel competent to be able to take on someone else's career. That felt too big to me. I could contribute, but to be ultimately responsible was more than I could put on my shoulders. And after 10 years at the major labels, Warner Brothers, Sony Music, Columbia, Epic, etc., I left Nashville and went to New York. And over the next 10 years, I ran 4 independent global labels and was in executive management for those. And the reason I made that choice was because I needed to know what it was like to try and break an artist that was a barista and not break an artist when Epic hands me a check for X number of dollars and says, there's this little girl named Celine in Quebec. Would you listen to this and see what you can do to market her? Right. Yeah. I didn't have those opportunities when someone's like slinging coffee as a barista or working as a waitress like actors do. Right.
So you like a challenge is what you're trying to say.
I don't know. Maybe glutton for punishment. What I really believed was that if someone came to me in that ecosystem, I could do my job. But if I opened a management company and they weren't in that ecosystem, I wouldn't know anything about how to move forward. And I knew I had to uproot myself and put myself in a very uncomfortable position in order to learn how to do a lot more with a lot less. So instead of 3 million, I might have 3,000.
Yeah. That's what growth is putting yourself in uncomfortable positions.
It was horrible. It was like I was miserable. I was like, what have I done to myself? I say often it was like getting out of the back of a tinted windowed black Escalade and like hopping in the passenger seat of a rusted out station wagon. And that's really what it was. I mean, but that's what picked me up at the airport, right? It's like, oh my God, where am I? But 10 years doing that, and then we learned. They learned artist development theory from someone who was in the middle of it. And I learned how to do things on a shoestring budget. And within 3 years, we had our first Billboard #1. And then after that, we had close to 30 #1 singles at US radio. So we did really, really well. We did really, really well. But I still wasn't ready to go into management. I didn't think I could do it. So I left the labels altogether. And I spent another 10 years preparing for my job. Chris, doctors only, like they prepare for 8 years, right? And with internships and everything. I prepared for 30 years for my gig.
So you've been preparing and learning on the job all this time.
All this time.
Yeah.
And the last section of that was about intellectual property. It was about copyright law. It was about licensing. It was about revenue generation. But really very back office. So I went from the ball cap and the joggers in the studio with people smoking weed to like the French cuffs in the boardroom with the and you wore the suit because you were money.
Yeah.
It was wild, but I hated that too. I learned what I needed to learn, but I hated it.
So along that whole line, like what was your favorite part of it?
It was always taking artists that needed someone to just scoop them up. There were a lot of artists that had big teams around them, but plenty of artists that were in the system and doing quite well didn't have the support that they needed. And I just was drawn to them. I was like, okay, who needs help? And I do tell this story of Mary Chapin Carpenter, who was a Columbia artist signed back when I was 23, 24. And I was sitting in an office, and Chris, you have to understand. So in those days, hair down to my elbows, cigarette hanging out of my mouth, thermos of coffee on the desk, like phone in my ear like this, like we're hustling, right? It's old school. And I see this woman walk back and forth in front of my desk, and it's like an SNL skit. I'm just literally watching her go back and forth. And so at some point I'm like, what is going on? So I'm like, excuse me, miss, and she goes, yes. And I said, can I help you with something? And why are you in the building? And she's like, I'm supposed to be meeting A&R. And I'm like, you're not meeting A&R, where are they? And she goes, they got fired. And I said, okay, wait, so you came here for a meeting to meet with someone who no longer works for the company? And she's like, exactly. I'm like, who are you? She's like, I'm Mary Chapin Carpenter. I'm signed to Columbia.
Oh my.
And I said, okay, well, this is a little crazy. Come in and sit down. So she came in and she sat down for a minute and we talked. And I realized that she had been sent to take on, a creative meeting, and her managers were in DC. And I said, okay, we're done. And I put all my calls on hold, canceled everything. And I took her by the arm and I walked her through that 4-story building and walked into every office and every conference room and interrupted even the president of the company to open up the door while they were on the phone or meeting with people and saying, hi, sorry to interrupt, but this is Mary Chapin Carpenter and she's signed to Columbia and she's in the building. I would like for you to meet her.
Wow. That's service.
But that was instinctive to me.
Yeah.
Even though it could have been career suicide. And I did make some senior men really, really angry. It was instinctive to me. We made an agreement as a company that we were going to stand by her and represent her, and there was no one representing her. Yeah. And she was in our building. So I was going to represent her.
Yeah. That's right back to your why.
Back to my why.
And that upbringing,
And that upbringing, right?
Actually,
so that's, when people say, who did you break over the years? That's real. I was involved in 2,300 projects lifetime so far. So that's a lot. And I don't lay claim to any of them, but I do say that I was instrumental with her. And both of her managers would agree that I was. We sold 17 million albums. So
we've talked a lot about your professional life.
Yeah.
Anything on the personal side in your journey that is kind of significance?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. When I was about 19, when all of this was happening and finding my way at Belmont, I was having some anxiety and some depression. And I wasn't quite sure where that was coming from or what that was about. But I did know that was kind of a genetic trait in my father's family. And at 19, I was put on Tofenil, which was my first antidepressant. Throughout college, I was focused on my work, and that was a great distraction, but I didn't take care of my mental health or my emotional health, because why do I have to? I'm on a plane, right? Yeah. All expenses paid. What could be wrong?
Yeah.
Nothing could be wrong.
I'm living the dream. Nothing could be wrong.
I'm living the dream. Like, how many people did I just leave on the ground at Belmont who are still schlepping to class, right? Yeah. I'm doing great. But I wasn't. And I wasn't managing the stress. I wasn't managing kind of my own demons. And with that in mind, I started some therapy. I started seeing a psychiatrist, and they were trying different medications throughout my 20s and 30s. And anyone that's familiar with prescriptions for depression and anxiety knows that even after you find the magic bullet, after a while, that magic bullet isn't quite as sharp as it used to be. And that was my situation. So by the time I turned 40, Chris, I was diagnosed with treatment-resistant unipolar double depression, which meant that there was no way for me to not be depressed, that there were no medications left. And it was just this heavy weight on me that I used alcohol to some degree to cope. I used exercise to cope. I wasn't in the drug scene. That was for the artist to do. I was the suit. So I had to, have my head about me. But the depression was really intense. And right after I turned 40, they told me, they said, there's really not a whole lot that you can do at this point. And I said, I don't have to live like this. And I found out that they were doing something with a drug called ketamine. And this was 20 years ago in Germany. And they were injecting ketamine through people's skulls when they had treatment-resistant unipolar double. Yeah. And I said, I'm going to do that. And so I started meeting with doctors, and I said, what do I have to do to get to Germany? What do I have to do to figure this out? And they said, well, there's a prerequisite for this. You can't just go to Germany and have a doctor do this for you.
Right.
What's that? I said, well, the prerequisite is you have to have shock therapy. You literally have to have electrodes put on the side of your head and have that done repeatedly until you kind of reset your brain to factory settings, what they were supposed to be, and change the chemicals inside your brain. And I said, I'll do it. And I did. So in my early 40s, I had 10 rounds of electroshock therapy. And it's like it sounds horrible because the media makes it out to be this thing, and I'm looking at you with the headphones on. I'm thinking, well, that's kind of what it looked like. But it lasted 3 seconds, and all it does is force a seizure. That's all it is. It's just running current, really small through, and my father had it.
Okay.
And so I wasn't afraid of it. Again, risk taking. I'll do what I have to do, and I came out the other side. And so that's a story that I tell often, is that anyone that's going through depressive episodes, whether they be biological or situational, there's this on the other side. I'm the happiest, luckiest guy on the planet.
Yeah, it always amazes me whenever I have a conversation with somebody about their mental health, and just to understand, like, to grasp the complexity and the uniqueness of it. Like, every single person, like, the treatment that works for them is very unique to them. And I'm, really glad that you were able to find something that worked for you, because I've seen, like, people in my personal life who have, when they get that thing that works, like, they become a completely different person because their brain is functioning in a different, healthier way.
And I've never gone back. I mean, it was it was a thing. There was a blessing that came with it in addition to the treatment itself, and that was that the doctors told me that I could lose some short-term memory. And at the time, I had, on the personal life side, again, I had fostered 2 infants in distress through the New Jersey foster care system. And I was going to be able to adopt both of them with my partner at the time. And so with that in mind, they said, you may not remember everything. And I said, okay, well, these kids don't have family, and I'm not going to show up as family and not have a history that they can take with them. So I'm going to write everything down. And before I went in for the shock therapy, I wrote 28,000 words. And I didn't write a book, but I did write stories of my life, so that in the event that some of it disappeared, I had a record of it.
Did you lose any of it in the process?
The only thing I forgot was I attended a wedding, and I have no recollection of being in that church.
Huh.
That was the only thing.
Well, you got lucky that it was just that one selective thing. But what a gift to have those words that you wrote down, even though you can still remember them, because it's there. You wouldn't have been motivated to do that otherwise.
No way would I sit and write 28,000 words. Yeah. I don't have the patience for that. I wouldn't have done it.
So how old are your kids now?
They'll be 19 next month and 22 in August.
Have they read what you wrote yet?
They haven't, but they will. I am going to publish it. Okay. When they were smaller, when it was written, when I was okay, a dear friend of mine, Patsy Bale Cox, was an editor, kind of a ghostwriter for a lot of people in Nashville. She wrote Garth Brooks's biography. She wrote, I think she contributed to Tammy Wynette's, Jenny Jones, Tanya Tucker. So anyway, she took the manuscript and was actually taking it to Random House, and she was going to edit it for me. And she passed away. So I put the book in a box. Yeah. And I haven't pulled it back out again. Yeah. But I did stumble across it last week. And I think it's going to have to see the light of day, because it is a story about depression and not about the music business. It is a story about my family and biological depression as a kid, and then as an adult.
Those kind of stories need to be told. You should get out of that box.
Yeah, and no shame, no hiding this story from anyone. I'll talk about it to anybody, anywhere, because jaws drop when people say, "Wait a minute, you did what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they put these electric ones on the side, one's on the top, and then they run electricity through you." And they're like, "Oh my God, like Frankenstein." And I'm like, "Yeah, pretty much."
Yeah. So let's switch up a little bit. One of the themes that I have running through this podcast is this idea of growth. And one of the things that I have found in my own life and in talking to all the people that I've talked to via this podcast is that most people, in order to grow, have to take something that they learned early in life and that had held on dearly to early in life and get rid of it. And you can call that deconstruction. And so, what are some of those things? Yeah, I think you hinted at some of those things while telling your story. But what are those things that were sort of foundational to you that you've had to deconstruct and sort of say, this isn't good for me anymore. This doesn't work for me anymore?
There are a lot of things like that I think would have others would say, oh, well, we're not treating my body the right way and not making time for growth and reflection and not spending enough time alone. There are a lot of things that are in religious dogma, and a lot of those things that, I deconstructed and compartmentalized and put away because I don't need them anymore. But I also codified some stuff. The thing that I had to build for myself was an understanding around the term or the phrase that the highest form of love is discipline, of self-love is discipline. And that came from the Stoics. And I didn't agree with that. And it kept coming across my desk. And I kept being reminded that I didn't understand what that meant, because I was sure that there were other things that were higher forms of self-love than discipline would be. And so I started to kind of tear it apart. I thought maybe self-forgiveness or self-trust or honesty would be higher forms of self-love than discipline. And rather than research why they came to that conclusion and why it's been purported for so long, I decided I would deconstruct that on my own. So I created 4 steps. I codified my own process of how I could justify that statement. And I started with discipline being high bandwidth, lots of friction, lots of frustration. I can't say off the top of my head that I've ever been disciplined about anything and was real happy about being disciplined about it. The word itself has got a negative connotation to it. Like, let's be disciplined about this. And so it just felt really big, and it felt like it was a challenge. It not insurmountable, but definitely if you're going to add discipline into your life, that it was going to create conflict and barriers. It was going to be problematic. And I thought, well, so what happens when we're disciplined about something? What is the natural next step from being disciplined? And it occurred to me that there is something that happens when we are disciplined that we cannot prevent. There's a byproduct that comes from discipline that we are not allowed to interject or remove. If we are disciplined about something, then we have no choice but to be consistent. And so I took it down a step, and I was like, okay, so discipline feels real heavy and big and frustrating, to me at least. And it sounds like it's going to be a struggle. And then it's like, well, if I'm consistent with something, does that feel like it's the same bandwidth? Does it feel like the word itself, I'm consistently eating right, doesn't feel as punitive or restrictive to me as being disciplined about it, right? And maybe it's the word, but it's also the idea that through discipline, we become consistent, and we can't be consistent any other way. So there's a relationship there that I kind of put a spotlight on and said, okay, so this makes sense to me, but that still doesn't tell me why that's the highest form of self-love. I still didn't get what it was Socrates or Plato, whoever it was.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, what does consistency give us, right? Can I take this down another step? And I thought, well, if we're consistent, what are we consistent with? We're consistent by, we put trees up in our living rooms 1 month out of the year. We're consistent. We do our grocery shopping on one specific day of the week. We're consistent. We go to church services on one particular day of the week. We're consistent. We never fight about what kind of bird we're going to cook for Thanksgiving. We're consistent. So if what does consistency bring us? And it brings us rituals.
Yes.
And so discipline begats. It gives us consistency, but then consistency gives us rituals. And rituals are even less bandwidth. As you step further down away from discipline, it becomes more freeing and more easy, less consequential, less of a struggle, less of a fight in order to have something built into your life.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, wait, I'm starting to see that they're onto something here. Can it go one more level? And I thought about it further, and I thought, well, if it's something that's a ritual, whatever we choose to be a ritual, right? And whatever society chooses to be a ritual, after a certain amount of time, what does a ritual become? What does that turn into? And that's when I thought I struck gold, because rituals ultimately become our habits.
Hmm.
And our habits don't take effort. They don't
Yeah.
cause friction. They aren't um, huge, heavy weights. The fact that you brush your teeth with the same hand you've brushed your teeth with your whole life means that you're on autopilot. It's a habit. You
Yeah.
were disciplined until you were consistent, until it was a ritual, until your body took over, and you don't even have to be present in order for that habit to override where you are in that moment so your mind can go somewhere else. And
Yeah.
I thought, okay, so we can go from like big, heavy bandwidth to autopilot. So, what does that mean? What does it mean to the things that I said that I thought were going to be the highest form of self love? It's like, oh, well, we just apply them to this structure. Let's be disciplined about self forgiveness until it's consistent and becomes a ritual, and then it's a habit. And when it has no more bandwidth
Mm.
challenge to it, then we are allowed to put something else back into it. Now will be self truth until we're consistent,
So
right?
what does that look like on the ground in your life?
Ooh, I struggle with discipline. For me, it's one of my coaching tools, and I apply it for the creative people that I work with. I apply specifically one task at a time to be disciplined
Mm.
about, one behavior modification, one rewrite of um, an untrue thing that we tell ourselves. We pick
Yeah.
one, and until it's a habit, until it's no longer there, and then we pick another one. And I like to say that I do that as much as I require other people to do it. But if I'm
Yeah.
honest, Chris, that's really not the way it works.
Yeah. It's I coach a lot of people in my own life as well. And I will catch myself often when I'm coaching them, or even in the cases where I'm mentoring them, I will often catch myself and go, "Do you follow that advice yourself?" And a lot of the times the answer has to be honestly no. But I know it's the right thing. So I'm not going to give them advice that's the wrong thing.
Right?
But that doesn't mean I'm perfect in incorporating all of those right things in my life.
No, that's exactly it. And we
Yeah.
have to give ourselves patience, and we have to give ourselves grace. That
Yep.
we can't be everything that we purport to teach others in order for them to be their best selves. And there are times in my life when I've been incredibly disciplined. I just celebrated 13 years without a cigarette. That has become a habit, right? So I'm proud of
Yeah.
that one, and I will refer back to that one for the rest of my life. But for now, there's not a new one that's coming into play other than the act of letting go. That's been my lately, the past few years, letting go has been the biggest wrestle for me.
Okay. Thank you. I love that. I love the framing that you did there. So let's switch to the concept of community. Who do you rely on for support, or what do you rely on for support? You've talked about, you know, your why and in your career and in your life. You've been supporting all of these people, but the supporter needs to be supported as well. So, like, where do you go for support?
Okay, so that it's the high achiever syndrome, that it's a little bit tough sometimes. Yeah, the overachiever in me says that I need to make sure that I'm not leaning on anyone else and dependent on them for me to find my value and to find my peace. So my first instinct, even though I know it's not completely healthy, is to respond by saying, "Well, Chris, I look inward and I try to find it in myself." There is, of course, community or finding your tribe, and for me, that has been a process. I call it shedding throughout my whole life. There are those of us that want to grow and have infinite mindsets. And because we are constantly evaluating and trying to upgrade our experience while we're here, we outgrow people that are around us that aren't
Mm.
trying to do the same thing. And that can happen in marriages, that can happen in best friends, that can happen in high school sweethearts, that can happen in college, it can happen over a period of decades, it can be neighbors, it can be family members. But there are people that we shed. And what I've come to realize is that the easiest way for me to find community is to let community find me. And what I mean by that is, instead of going out and trying to find people that are like me, I understand a universal truth that if I am wholly authentic in who I am and how I present myself, that I don't dim my light for anyone to make them more comfortable, that I don't edit or censor myself, as long as I'm being true and honest and kind and all the good values,
Yeah.
that those people will find me and introduce themselves to me. I relocated from New York to Palm Springs 4 years ago. And for the first 2 years, I had my youngest daughter living with me here. And I rarely was socializing with anyone, neighbors, new friends, anyone. And I said, I don't need a tribe. I don't need a tribe. Now that she's gone off to college, the tribe is coming to me. People are introducing themselves to me and saying, oh, I have a house in Palm Springs, or, oh, I'll be there in a week. You want to get together while I'm there? The tribe is building itself based on my intention to be authentic.
That's a really great framing of how to look at that. That if you are your authentic self, your tribe will find you, because we so often transpose that and become something that we're not in order to find the tribe.
Well, and when we do find the tribe, they don't align with us completely. It's often very superficial. One of the things that I tell the people that I mentor and coach is when a business partner removes themselves from the equation, thank them for self-selecting. That you didn't
Yes.
have to do it 3 years later.
Yep.
When a friend says, well, this is going to kill our friendship, thank them for self-selecting and accept it for what it is. So this is what goes back to that whole letting go idea, right?
For years and years and years, and I'm in my 50s now, but for years I was literally cycling friends about every 5 years. I just was getting new groups of friends, and like I always thought something was wrong with me because all these other people in my life had these friends that they'd stayed in contact with since high school or college, and for 30, 40 years. And there's nothing wrong with that if it works for you, but it didn't work for me.
Right.
And yeah.
I don't want to yuck anybody else's yum. I don't want to get into that place of being judgmental about it, but chances are no one was growing. If you still have the same dynamic with someone, it could be because it's a really unique and special relationship that should be lifelong. But for people that are kind of, just barely outside your circle of influence, if they're still hanging on, there's usually something else going on there.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not growing at the same rate. You're not experiencing the same things. You're not leaning on each other and being absolutely vulnerable with one another in that way.
So what role does male friendship play in your life? This is a fascinating question to me, and I've gotten so many different answers to this. I'd be interested in your answer to that.
Okay, so my answer now is I don't care. I'll tell you what that means. When I was in high school, when I was in college, it was pivotal. It was absolutely mission critical that I had my guys to hang out with, that I had peers that were very much like me. I don't care anymore. It's not that I'm excluding anyone. It's just that gender doesn't play the role that it used to play. And I'm much more open to people's spirits and who they are intrinsically, rather than any kind of predisposed social norms that would come along with how they present or how they identify or any of that kind of stuff.
Did that occur to you one day, or was it a gradual transition to this place? Like how did you make that change?
Well, when you've been in a 30-year relationship and you've been raising children, your neighbors become your friends. And, like it's just like, when you leave college and you become the first ones to have a baby, right? Then like all the single friends are like, okay, well, they check out, so as it happened gradually, everything just kind of moved at its own pace. There wasn't any dramatic moment. When I did move 3,000 miles away and left my marriage 4 years ago now, when that happened, in order for me to live my best life and take care of my children the best way that I knew how, I did shed more than I expected to shed, and male and female, right? And so that has been, and that's why that letting go theme keeps coming back. I didn't realize that it was going to be such a theme in my life at this age in my life. I'm 61. So I wasn't sure that was how things were going to play. But I had someone hand me Buddhism for Dummies when I moved. And I got about 4 chapters into it, and I got stuck on a sentence, and I haven't gotten past it yet.
What's that sentence?
The root of all suffering is attachment.
Mm. Wow. I would have said the root of all suffering is misaligned expectations, but I think they're related to each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that I can't love my children more than I love life itself. It means that I have to detach myself in order to let them be who they are without my expectations being a blanket on top of them, without my, right?
Yes.
And same for my friends, same for my family, same for my ex, same for everyone. That as long as I remain attached, and we say, well, I'm attached to my car, and or I'm attached to my bank account. That's that certainly applies.
Yeah.
But for me, the trickiest part is the attachment to people and how they move through your life. And for you to stand, there's a tree pose in yoga. To stand in tree pose, rooted and grounded, no matter what's circling around you. And that means the tribe that comes in and introduces themselves, the tribe that pokes around the corner and goes, oh, yeah, you're not for me, and they self-select. And for the people that you shed, as well as all of these other ongoing lifelong relationships where you can remove attachment from it and still hold space and hold love for them. I didn't get that, and I'm still wrestling that one. I'm still wrestling. I can't even finish the book.
Yeah, I might have to
finish it until I own it.
Yeah, I might need to look up that book, because that you've kind of you've got me thinking right now, and I'm going to have to get my head back into the game here, because I have to finish interviewing you. But that's a really profound concept.
It rattled me when I read it.
Yeah.
And I'm not studying Buddhism because I want to be Buddhist. I'm just studying, like the Stoics, I'm studying everyone to learn what people smarter than I am have thought before I got here.
Yeah.
The root of all suffering is attachment. And it's like, what is the highest form of self-love? It's kind of like there's so many words you would put in there. Why is that? And I'm starting to understand it. And the process for me, I just frame it as letting go.
Yeah. I love that. You've got me speechless. But anyway, let's switch into our lightning round, where I'm going to ask you 11 questions. You don't have to dive deep. Don't have to dive deep into any of them. I might ask a couple of kind of pointed follow-ups if I want to know a little bit more about your answer.
Okay.
But the first question is, what are your top 3 values?
Ooh, these are non-negotiables. Honesty comes first. Communication. Intentionality.
Oh God, I love those. Like I actually want to spend an hour talking about all 3 of those with you, but we can't.
I built my company on three that are not the same, but I built my company on 3, which are capacity, intentionality, and reciprocity. So when you say what my values are, that describes my business relationships. But if I have to have honesty in there, if it's my value, I don't have time for anyone that is not true to themselves, because then they can't be true with me.
Yeah, you're the first person that has chosen any of those 3.
Really?
And this is episode 14. So that you have a unique 3, which I at this point I don't expect a unique 3 anymore. But that's fantastic. Okay. So who is one role model that you've had in your life?
My grandfather, Basil B. McMahon, a very gentle man, an author. He's in the in the federal archives. His books are in the federal archive. He was a historian. He was a state member of the state legislature in Tennessee in the 1930s. Politician, preacher, author, Renaissance man, beautiful spirit.
Who do you hope you're a role model for?
Anyone that it goes back to lift while I'm climbing. Lift because they did for me. Anyone that I'm trying to lift while I'm climbing, but certainly my children, my 2 daughters.
Okay.
That's so important to me, that they look to me and see some beacon of something that they want to be.
Yeah. What's the one way you make the world a better place for others?
I am determined to make impact. And whether that impact is to change someone's mind or be provocative to make them think, that's what I've dedicated I'm not trying to solve anybody's problems. I'm trying to give them the tools to solve them. I would have been a psychologist if I hadn't gone into the music business, but in the music business, I'm kind of a psychologist anyway. But having impact and knowing that I walk away from my work in particular, or from my children, in relationships with friends, and know that I have stimulated them in some way.
Yeah. That question actually reminds me of I was listening to, I believe it was your interview with Mark McEwen earlier, and you mentioned a Joan Rivers quote about the world, and
Oh yeah,
can you share that
yeah,
quote with our viewers here?
absolutely. So, not that I'm a huge Joan Rivers fan, but it did fall out of her mouth once, and I did catch it.
Yeah.
And that was this: she said, "Life does not get better; you get better."
Yeah. And I
And
just I that
it's powerful.
yeah, like super super powerful that it's not about, we don't have much control over changing life. We only have our reactions in it, and the way we respond to it, and like getting better in our reactions and our responses are the way we make our lives better and ourselves better.
Absolutely, 100%. I was called the pioneer of the musician mindset movement by Thriving Musician, for the simple reason that I tell every single one of my clients and all of anyone that I can get to listen to me long enough, that your life experience is entirely up to you. Your perception, your lens of how you look at what's happening to you, how you feel, what's happening inside you, your inputs that are coming at you from outside, your externals. Someone else could be living the exact same life and have a completely different experience because they're doing it in a more healthy way. We
Yeah,
choose to look at our lives a certain way. And we are powerful enough to be able to change our experience just by changing the way that we think. There is always a different perspective that is healthier, always. Even if you think you've climbed to the top of the mountain, you can do better.
yeah,
And when we do that, it doesn't matter that life doesn't change. It matters that we have the tools to skate.
exactly. That is wisdom right there. So this is a question that I've gotten really interesting answers to. And what's the hardest thing about being you in today's world?
Wow. That's 3-4 hours worth of response time. It's not easy being me. I say that self-deprecating. I enjoy being who I am. Uh, I think that the most honest thing that I can say is that I'm an HSP. That many people know that an HSP is a highly sensitive person, or some people call
Okay.
them empaths, right?
Okay.
We all pick up energy, right?
Yeah.
Everything is energy. We are energy, and we all respond to energy. Like, there are studies that tell us things like when you walk down the street and someone walks past you and they smile, that releases serotonin in your brain,
Yeah.
whether you acknowledge it or you think anything about them or not. That energy impacts you, right?
Yes.
So, as an empath, someone who's just very sensitive, no wonder I'm around sensitive crooning musicians, right?
Yeah.
And sad boys writing songs, right? I mean, there's no wonder that I surround myself with those people, because they're highly sensitive. And I think that when you can feel alive, and no one in my family was born this way, as sensitive as I am, so they don't get it, right? They
Yeah.
don't understand. Like, it's incomprehensible to them. But when you're born with a perception or an ability to perceive, you have to be real careful about what you allow inside you. And to absorb the
Yeah.
pain of the world, to absorb the pain of politics, to absorb the pain of the hungry, to absorb the pain of driving
Yes.
past a homeless person is something that impacts me in a different way that it impacts other people. And I have to learn
Yeah.
how to not let that wreck me.
Yeah.
And
There's a
especially when my job is mentoring and coaching other people and they're coming to me with problems that have to be solved, I can't
yeah.
let their problems. So I actually have rituals for that kind of thing, habits in between each call, so I can reset my system, just breathing techniques and such, so that I can scrape off what just happened in case I'm carrying anything residual. I feel any kind of way after having had a call, right? That I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
absorb.
You have to learn how to compartmentalize
Yeah,
in
and
a lot
scrape
of
it off.
different ways. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
hardest thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite emotion?
Joy.
Why?
Joy is pure. Joy has a
Mm.
we remember our moments of joy with such detail. We can think back to a joyful moment when we were a kid on a skateboard, or a joyful moment in a wedding chapel, or a joyful moment having met someone the first time, experienced some success. There's being able to live with those things within reach of our spirit and of our mind. That's what gets us through when life hasn't gotten better and we need to get better. It's remembering
Yeah.
that those joyful moments are in front of us. We
Yeah.
just have to aim for them.
Yeah.
That's the secret sauce.
Gorgeous. I love that.
Thanks.
What's your least favorite emotion?
Like anyone that is on the creative spectrum, feeling rejected, being rejected. That's a tough
Mm.
one.
Have you, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with that emotion when you feel it?
Oh, tantrums normally. I'm kidding.
Well, it's understandable.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that you know me, sure, Wayne, I figured that out. I think that for me, I have to check myself. I have a lot of arguments in the shower. Like most, I'm really good at it. I can win some tremendous arguments that will never happen in real life in the shower before the day begins. And if I have those, it's probably because I feel on some level that someone has dismissed me or rejected my idea or put things that I think are really important off to the side. And that all goes into one big ball for me. And so I have a trigger phrase for myself when I feel myself moving into that space. I think everyone should have one that stops them in their tracks. And mine is, Wayne, have a word with yourself. Because if I ever said, Chris, have a word with yourself, I would be really serious about you taking stock right then and right there. Like that's what I
Yeah.
would say to someone in the moment that I had to, like, I
Yeah.
need to get your attention. And it gets my attention.
Yeah. I might use that with other people and
Right.
myself. Yeah. And myself.
Right.
So you mentioned joy being your favorite emotion. What brings you the most joy in life?
Ooh, anytime that I can feel bliss through peace, anytime that I can find peace, either in meditation, in water, usually in sun, when I can push everything out of my brain for a few minutes and focus on my breathing and just experience a moment of peace, that to me is probably the closest thing to self imposed joy um,
Hmm.
than I can imagine. It's a practice too.
Yeah. What makes you most proud of yourself?
When I know, lift while you're climbing, when I know, when someone comes back to me and says thank you,
Hmm.
that oof, right
That's,
here gets
yeah,
me right here every time.
that's so simple, but really that's really powerful.
Penetrating, like
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. When my clients cry, and 100% of my male clients have cried with me. When
Yeah.
my clients cry, I hold it together until we're done, and then I go cry just for a minute, just to let it
Yeah.
out, because
Yeah.
it's just so incredibly powerful. I'm not a crier, but something will happen. It's a
Yeah.
physical response to intense emotion.
Yeah. 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 I've had that response ever since my son was born.
Oof,
like I was never like a super like somebody who teared up at movies or anything
Right.
like that. The day after my son was born, like a puppy would come on TV and I'm like, what is happening to me? And it's been that way for 22 years now.
Okay, Chris, you
And
were handed a tool.
yeah,
You were handed a tool to be the best dad you could be to your
yeah,
22-year-old son.
yeah,
And that is
yeah,
availability, emotionally available, right?
yeah, yeah. So where can you feel the most yourself?
It has to do with solitude. I grew up kind of an only child. My sister was 12 years older than I was. So she left for college when I went into first grade. It was like growing up with a great aunt. It wasn't like growing up with a sibling. So I spent a lot of time growing up in solitude, and I found a lot of comfort there. And so I still go back to that place. I'm
Hmm.
around people and noise and music and events and shiny objects all the time. I live in the
So
desert for a reason.
where are you on the extrovert introvert continuum? Is you feel like you could be like an introvert who masquerades as an extrovert.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
You nailed it. Yeah,
Okay.
you're good. You're
Yeah.
good. You're really good. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
have to extrovert in order to command a room,
Yeah.
whether that's a studio or board of directors or whatever. I have to be an extrovert, and I have to turn myself on in that way. But it wipes me out.
Yeah. I'm married to one of those, so I get it.
Okay.
So yeah. Last question and a way to wrap up our conversation today. What's the one thing that you hope people take away from this episode?
That goes back to my principle that overshadows everything that I've been able to teach people, and it has transformed their lives and their careers only because they took what I gave them and they used it, not because I came with something that changed their life. They changed their lives. But the way that you decide to think about your existence here, that determines the quality of your existence here.
Yes.
I know some really, really wealthy people who are miserable, and everything is handed to them, fame, fortune, all of it. And they're miserable people. And then it doesn't take too much effort to flip on a YouTube channel or a news network and see a man in the rubble of war holding his daughter.
Yeah.
And I look at the two of them side by side and I say, who is finding joy? Who's being mindful about what they have?
Yeah.
Bathing his daughter in the ruins of what was their home in a bathtub in a bathroom that has no walls. And then I put it up against my Hollywood Hills friends who are miserable because they don't have everything they want. That is mindset.
Yep.
So we start mindset by being mindful. And once we are mindful, then we can change our mindset. And we all have that power. Every single one of us. There's not one of us that came to this place that does not have the ability to change the way that they think so that they can live in more gratitude and joy. Not one of us came with that deficit, didn't get that toolkit. Every one of us has it, but only a few of us choose to use it.
It's a wonderful notion to end our conversation on. Thank you so much, Wayne, for the conversation today. And I'll end it by the same way I end all of our conversations, and it is to encourage you to keep up the hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You too. Thank you.
You can learn more about Illuminate at illuminate.substack.com. We are also streaming on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you at the next episode of Illuminate.